They always said I was the family's cautionary tale, the dropout who'd end up broke and begging for help. At 39, I returned home for a serious family meeting, wearing faded jeans and sneakers held together by hope. Exactly the image they expected. They didn't know the tech company I'd built sold for millions 6 months ago. They didn't know the care home they were fighting over already belonged to my foundation. And they definitely didn't expect the sound of helicopter blades slicing over the maple tree. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here to see if family could change. The call came just after sunrise, when the city outside my apartment windows was still half asleep. My phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in weeks, Grant Hart. My brother didn't do small talk, so the sharp edge in his good morning was no surprise. He got straight to it. Mom had fallen, broken her hip, and Dad's early-stage dementia was progressing faster than expected. There would be a family meeting this weekend. His tone, polished and managerial, carried an unspoken question. Can you even contribute? It wasn't what he said. It was the pause after, the slight dip in his voice that landed heavier than any direct insult. I murmured I'd be there, though my grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles whitened. As soon as we hung up, a familiar ache spread through me. The one reserved for these moments when blood ties felt more like binding contracts than bonds of love. Images flashed uninvited, the group chat that quietly continued without me after I missed too many replies. The Thanksgiving I wasn't invited to because travel would be expensive for you. The night my parents told me they were cutting off financial support, until I came to my senses and finished my degree. In the years since, I'd built walls, elegant, invisible, and impenetrable. They thought those walls hid a life of barely scraping by. In truth, they hid Harborlock Security. The company I founded, the company I bled for through bankrupt scares, and 18-hour days until the patent came through and Aperture Systems bought us for more money than I could have imagined at 29. And they had no idea about the Blue Fern Foundation. My quiet project since, funding causes that mattered, like Willow Ridge Community, the care facility I designed from the ground up to treat residents like people, not patients. But none of that fit the version of me they preferred. The struggling middle child, useful only in her absence. I glanced at my planner, the week already crowded with board calls, contract sign-offs, and a Tokyo proposal I needed to approve. All of it could be moved. The meeting with my family could not. Not because I owed them an explanation, but because my parents, beneath the layers of pride and misjudgment, needed me. I could have taken the company jet and landed quietly at the small regional airstrip near Cedar Glen. It would have been easier, faster, private, but that would have meant the driver in a pressed suit, the kind of luggage my siblings would clock instantly, the smell of success that clung to leather interiors. That wasn't the role they'd written for me. Instead, I pulled my old duffel from the closet, the one with the fraying strap and faded patches from trips I took in my 20s. I set it on the bed and began folding clothes that had nothing to do with my real life now. Worn jeans, sweaters soft from years of washing, sneakers that had been my dog-walking pair. The persona they expected fit neatly inside. The decision to fly commercial wasn't just about disguise, it was control. If they saw me arrive exactly as they pictured me, modest, perhaps a little tired, it would buy me space to watch, to listen, to measure just how far they were willing to believe their own narrative. The hum of the city gave way to the heavier silence of early determination. I'd need to rearrange meetings, send Keisha an updated itinerary, and let Derek, my pilot, know he wouldn't be needed until later in the weekend. None of them would question why. They understood that sometimes the best move was the quiet one. Still, I paused with a sweater in my hands, the soft grey one with a tiny hole near the cuff. It had seen me through the nights when the ceiling leaked over my bed, through mornings when coffee was my only meal, through the day I signed the papers that made me a multimillionaire. In its threads was every version of me my family refused to believe existed. I zipped the duffel and set it by the door, ready for a flight that would take me not just back to Cedar Glen, but back into the intricate web of judgment, assumption, and unspoken resentment. This time I wasn't returning as the girl they dismissed. I was coming back as the woman who'd built an empire they didn't know existed yet. And until the moment was right, I'd let them think otherwise. The regional flight landed with the kind of thud that rattled the overhead bins. By the time I collected my duffel, the sky over Cedar Glen was the soft grey of late afternoon. The taxi ride from the airport took me past storefronts I remembered like old photographs. The bakery where Mom used to buy birthday cakes. The shuttered hardware store Dad once visited every Saturday. The ice cream parlour that felt impossibly big when I was 8. Everything seemed smaller now, as if the town had been scaled down in my absence. We turned down Maple Street, and there it was, the towering maple tree in my parents' yard, branches bare this time of year, but still reaching wide like they owned the sky. Behind it stood the white, 2-story, colonial, blue shutters, freshly painted, the same worn steps leading to the front door. The garden beds lay dormant, but I could still imagine Mom in her straw hat, fussing over marigolds and roses. Grant opened the door before I could knock. He looked like he'd stepped out of a glossy alumni magazine, pressed slacks, a cashmere sweater, an expensive watch he adjusted even as he spoke. His eyes scanned me head to toe, lingering on my sneakers. Finally, he said, the word carrying more weight than just a greeting. Did your flight get delayed? Or did you have to take the bus from the airport? I let the jab pass. Good to see you too, Grant. I stepped forward, offering a hug. He returned it with the stiffness of someone fulfilling a social obligation. Mum appeared from the kitchen, leaning on a cane, her gait slower but her eyes bright. She wrapped her arms around me as best she could. Evelyn, sweetheart, you look... She hesitated, eyes drifting over my sweater, jeans, and the duffel at my side. Healthy. You're eating enough on your budget, right? I smiled, tucking away the sting. I'm fine, Mum. How are you feeling? From the living room, Dad's voice floated in. Is that Carol? He was half standing from his recliner, confusion shadowing his face. Carol had been our next-door neighbour when I was a child. The pang in my chest was swift and sharp. No, Dad, it's Evelyn, I said gently, moving toward him. He blinked, then smiled faintly, as if humouring me. Before I could sit beside him, the front door swung open again. Sienna breezed in, all polished hair and a cashmere dress, with Ethan trailing behind, his arms laden with shopping bags. The air shifted. She had that effect. We're here, she announced, kissing Mom on the cheek, careful not to smudge her makeup. And we brought gifts. One by one, she handed them out. A vintage scotch for Dad, a silk scarf for Mom, a leather portfolio for Grant. Then she turned to me, her smile tightening. And for you, Evelyn... She reached into one of the bags and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a gift card to a mid-range clothing store I hadn't set foot in for over a decade. "I thought you could use this," she said, her tone drenched in what she probably believed was sisterly concern. "Maybe pick up a few professional pieces for interviews." Grant glanced over, the corner of his mouth twitching. Ethan just shifted his weight, clearly wishing to be elsewhere. I took the card, feeling its lightness in my palm. The old me might have bristled, might have made a sharp comment that would echo through the evening. Instead, I looked Sienna in the eye and smiled. "Thank you. That's thoughtful. I'll make sure to use it right away." Her brows lifted slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to accept it without a fight. "Good," she said. "I just want you to have the right tools, you know." I nodded, slipping the card into my sweater pocket. She didn't need to know that using it right away meant something entirely different than she imagined. The moment would come, but not tonight. For now, I let them have their version of me. Dinner was served with the precision of a catered gala, though we were sitting in my parents' dining room. Grant had arranged the meal through a high-end service from the city: roasted duck, truffle mashed potatoes, artisan bread, still warm in its wrapping, vegetables plated like a magazine, spread. Mum clasped her hands together when she saw it all. "Grant, this must have cost a fortune," she said, voice full of admiration. "You're always so generous." He gave a modest shrug, the kind that still managed to broadcast pride. "It's nothing, Mom. We should enjoy these family moments while we can." The conversation unfolded like a highlight reel for Grant and Sienna's lives. Grant's recent promotion to executive vice president at his firm took centre stage, complete with anecdotes about boardroom wins and investor dinners. Sienna followed with stories of the charity gala she'd chaired last month, where she'd raised just over $200,000 for the Children's Hospital, then pivoted to Ethan's golf tournament win at their country club. When the spotlight shifted to me, it was almost accidental. "So, Evelyn," Sienna said, reaching for her wine, "what's new in... what is it you do again? Freelance design?" Grant chuckled softly. "Sounds like the kind of gig work where you're always chasing the next project. Must be unpredictable." I could feel all eyes on me, waiting for the safe, self-deprecating answer they'd come to expect. I offered a small smile. "It keeps me busy." They nodded politely, satisfied, and the conversation moved on. Proof that they weren't truly interested in my work, only in confirming their picture of it. As they laughed about a mutual friend's luxury renovation, my mind slipped backward. 10 years to a different dinner table. I could see myself then, 29, announcing I wouldn't be returning to college. The air had gone heavy in seconds. "You'll regret this for the rest of your life," Dad had said, eyes fixed on his plate. Mum's lips had tightened, her fork resting untouched. "You need a degree to be taken seriously." Grant had leaned back, arms crossed. "Some people are meant to lead and innovate, others are meant to follow. There's no shame in knowing your place." And Sienna, laughing then, not unkindly but in a way that stripped the dignity from my decision. "Well, at least you'll have time to perfect your latte art." The memory still had edges sharp enough to cut. I returned to the present as Mom, between bites, turned to me again. "Are you still in that tiny apartment you had, the one with the noisy neighbours?" "That was a few years ago," I said evenly. "Oh, good," she replied, "as long as you're somewhere comfortable." Sienna smirked into her glass. "Comfortable is relative. Remember when Evelyn's idea of success was buying name-brand cereal instead of generic?" Grant laughed, the sound low but pointed. I met Sienna's gaze and let my own expression remain unreadable. I'd learned long ago that silence could be more unsettling than any comeback. Still, there was a pull in my chest, an almost magnetic draw toward the same trap I'd fallen into before, defending myself to people who had no intention of changing their minds. Instead, I buttered a slice of bread and asked about Mum's recovery therapy, letting their version of me sit there at the table like an empty chair. It wasn't the truth, but it was the role they still believed they'd cast perfectly. Somewhere between the duck and the dessert, the conversation shifted. Grant cleared his throat, a signal everyone seemed to recognise. "We need to talk about Mum and Dad's care," he began, glancing at his watch before looking directly at me. "The costs are significant, but we're committed to making sure they have the best." Sienna leaned forward, her tone smooth. "Grant and I have been looking at some excellent facilities. Ethan's spoken to a few directors. Of course, we'd never want to pressure you, Evelyn." Grant nodded, picking up the thread. "You can contribute what you can. We don't expect you to match our share, just something symbolic, a gesture." The word symbolic landed like a polite insult, dressed up in charity. I sipped my water, letting the pause stretch. "A gesture," I repeated. "Yes," he said, "it's important we all feel invested, even if it's not substantial." Ethan, who'd been quiet until now, chimed in. "You know, Evelyn, my firm is looking for someone in a support role. Solid pay, great benefits, stable. You could take that on and still have time for your projects." There was the word projects spoken as if it meant knitting scarves for a church bazaar. Their faces were expectant, united in their belief that this was helpful advice. I smiled faintly as if considering it. "That's generous of you to think of me." But inside, another scene replayed, the night 6 months ago when I sat in a glass-walled conference room, pen in hand. The Aperture Systems acquisition papers spread before me. My legal team had left, the city outside a blur of lights. I signed the last page, slid it forward, and just then my phone buzzed. Mum's number. The message, "At the hospital. Fell. Hips broken." I'd closed my eyes, the ink still wet on a contract that made me wealthier than I'd ever dreamed, and felt nothing victorious. Just the weight of knowing I couldn't call her without reopening a wound she still pretended wasn't there. I'd texted back, "I'm thinking of you," and told no one in that boardroom what the message meant. That was the night I decided to keep my success quiet. If she couldn't see me when I was struggling, what would she do if she knew I was thriving beyond her definition of acceptable? Now, sitting at my parents' table, the memory settled over me like a heavy coat. Grant was explaining the cost breakdown, Sienna nodding in agreement, Ethan casually discussing luxury care standards. My name was an afterthought in their sentences, spoken softly, as if too much attention might break me. I realised they'd already written my part. A small, almost ceremonial contributor. Someone to be grateful for an invitation to the discussion. And I, for now, played along. The plates were cleared, coffee poured, and they moved on to debating the merits of assisted living versus in-home care. I kept my focus on the steam rising from my cup, the warmth against my palms, the soft clink of porcelain. Anchors in a conversation that treated me like a guest in my own family. Outside, the maple tree's branches scraped lightly against the window in the wind. I thought about how roots hold, even when the trunk is scarred. I didn't speak again until the topic changed, and even then only to ask who was bringing dessert. By 9 o'clock the next morning, the living room had been transformed into something between a corporate boardroom and a college lecture hall. Grant sat at the head of the coffee table, laptop open, a small portable projector beaming a crisp title slide onto the far wall. Parental care options, financial planning. Sienna and Ethan claimed the love seat, both in smart casual that still managed to look expensive. Mum was in her usual chair, Kane propped beside her, while Dad settled into his recliner, eyes drifting in and out of focus. I took the ottoman in the corner, the smallest, least comfortable seat in the room. Grant clicked to the next slide. I've researched the top 3 care facilities in the region, he began, his voice even, practiced. Photos of manicured lawns and spotless interiors filled the wall. Each offers excellent medical support, social engagement programs, and proximity to at least one of us. He went through them one by one. The amenities, the dining options, the specialised memory care programs for Dad. Each facility seemed more luxurious than the last, and with each slide the monthly cost crept higher. When he reached the final option, his preferred choice, he leaned forward. This is Brookhaven Manor. It's newly built, state-of-the-art, with seamless transitions from independent living to full memory care. The grounds include walking paths, a small golf course. Dad, you'd love it there. Dad blinked, nodded faintly, though it was unclear if he'd absorbed any of it. Grant's next slide showed a simple chart. Projected monthly expenses, retirement income, and the gap that needed to be filled. After factoring in Mom and Dad's existing resources, we're looking at a shortfall of about $8,000 per month. He tapped the screen. Here's the breakdown I propose. I'll cover 45%. Sienna and Ethan will take 40%. That leaves 15%, about $1,200 a month for Evelyn. He looked at me as if handing down an achievable goal to an underperforming intern. That's fair, Sienna added. We're all contributing according to our means. I folded my hands in my lap. 15%, I said, letting the number hang in the air. Grant smiled thinly. Of course, if that's a stretch, we can talk about alternative contributions. For instance, he clicked to a new slide that made my stomach tighten. My company has an opening in entry-level marketing. Modest salary, but full benefits. Steady hours. You could take that on and meet your contribution without strain. I studied him for a long moment, then glanced at the bullet points on the slide, like a career fair pitch for someone still finding their way. It was hard to tell if he believed he was helping, or if the condescension was intentional. Mum shifted in her chair, glancing between us. Evelyn, she said softly, do you even have enough to cover the taxi from the airport yesterday? The room went still. Heat rose to my face, but I kept my expression steady. Yes, Mum, I said. She patted my hand, the gesture both tender and pitying. I just worry, that's all. Grant moved on without missing a beat, launching into a slide about tax advantages for long-term care contributions. Sienna nodded along. Ethan chimed in occasionally about investment offsets. I stayed quiet, letting them build their perfect insulated plan. It was easier that way, for now. When Grant paused to sip his coffee, I leaned forward, my voice calm. There's another option you haven't considered, I said. Willow Ridge Community, 20 minutes from here. Exceptional memory care program, nationally recognised for its approach. Grant's brow lifted, already dismissive. I researched every quality facility within 50 miles. If it were worth considering, it would be in my presentation. It wouldn't, I replied evenly. Willow Ridge isn't on public lists. They only accept private clients through a foundation. Sienna tilted her head, a small smile playing at her lips. And how would you know about something like that? Because, I said, letting the pause stretch, the Blue Fern Foundation is mine. There was a beat of silence, followed by a short, sharp laugh from Grant. Come on, Evelyn. You expect us to believe you run some private healthcare foundation? Sienna joined in, her tone sugar-coated but edged. It's a nice thought. Maybe one day. Ethan just glanced at the ceiling as if trying to stay neutral. I felt the familiar pinch in my chest, that old practiced disbelief that seemed to be the family's default setting toward me. I'm not asking you to believe, I said. I'm telling you. Grant closed his laptop with a click, leaning back. Let's focus on realistic options. Brookhaven has availability now. The sound came then, faint at first. Just a low hum beyond the walls. My phone buzzed on the ottoman. I picked it up, glanced at the screen. Keisha. 15 minutes out. Front lawn is fine. I typed back, perfect. The hum grew louder, becoming a distinct rhythmic chopping through the air. Sienna frowned. What is that? Mum glanced toward the window. Her brow creased. Is it a storm? Grant stood, stepping toward the curtains. He froze, then turned back, incredulous. You have got to be kidding me. I stayed seated. No storm. The sound swelled until it filled the room, a physical vibration through the floorboards. Mum's hand gripped the arm of her chair. Dad straightened slightly, peering toward the light filtering in through the drapes. Is that a helicopter? Sienna asked, her voice rising. No one moved for a moment. Then Grant yanked the curtains aside. Beyond the maple tree, the sleek black helicopter descended, its rotors bending the winter grass, swirling loose leaves into the air. Mum gasped. That's in our yard. Are they even allowed to do that? I rose, smoothing my sweater. Yes. Sienna's eyes were wide now, her earlier smugness gone. What is going on? I met her gaze. You remember saying I probably didn't even own a car? You were right. I don't. I crossed to the door, the air in the room shifting from condescension to confusion. Ethan's hand rested lightly on Sienna's arm, as if to steady her. Grant still stood at the window, lips parted, struggling to fit the scene into the picture he'd built of me. When I opened the front door, the cold air rushed in, carrying the deep, rhythmic pulse of the rotors. The pilot, Derek, stepped out, helmet under one arm, giving me a casual salute. I turned back to my family. My ride is here. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Mum's face went pale, and she sank back into her chair. Dad's mouth opened slightly, his eyes clearer than they'd been all morning. Sienna clutched Ethan's sleeve. We can't just let her leave like this. Grant finally found his voice. What are you trying to prove, Evelyn? I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped onto the porch. The wind from the helicopter, tugging at my hair and clothes. The pilot reached for my bag, but I shook my head, keeping it slung over my shoulder. Inside, I could see them still frozen in place, caught between disbelief and the slow, creeping realization that they'd been wrong. The shift was small but undeniable, the air of superiority thinning, replaced by something else. When I climbed into the helicopter and pulled on the headset, Derek's voice came through, calm and steady. Where to? Home, I said, glancing out the window at the shrinking figures on the porch. Let's give them a minute to think. As the skids lifted off the grass, the downwash flattened the winter-brown lawn, sending a spiral of leaves skittering toward the street. The maple tree's bare branches shook violently in the rotor wash, as if the whole yard were holding its breath. Through the headset, Derek asked, Want me to circle once before we head out? I almost said yes. Instead, I let my gaze settle on the house. On the curtain twitch, where Sienna still stood. On the faint outline of Grant's rigid posture. On Mom's pale face, just visible through the glass. No, I said. They've seen enough for now. The helicopter banked toward the hills, the sound fading behind us. But I knew it would echo in their heads long after it was gone. The helicopter cut through the pale morning sky, the world below shrinking into quilted fields and ribbons of road. Derek's voice crackled in my headset. You sure you don't want me to circle? Give them one more look? I glanced out the side window. Cedar Glen was already fading behind us, the maple tree a speck now. No, I said, let's go straight. He nodded, adjusting the controls. The hum steadied into a low, constant rhythm. For a moment, I let myself breathe, really breathe, without the weight of their eyes on me. The landscape shifted from town to countryside, then to the wooded hills where my property began. As we crested a ridge, the estate unfolded beneath us. A renovated stone house sprawling across 10 bedrooms, its slate roof catching the winter light. A glass-walled office building set a short walk from the main house, gardens laid out in neat geometry, and beyond them the still mirror of a private lake. Even from the air, the herb garden was visible, a patchwork of greens and silvers in raised beds sheltered from the wind. Derek banked slightly, bringing us in low over the gardens. Keisha was already on the helipad, her hair tucked neatly into a scarf, a slim leather folder in her hands. She waited until the rotors slowed before stepping forward. Welcome back, she said, her voice cutting clean through the residual thrum in my ears. She handed me the folder. Family portfolio. Everything's in there. Trust, documents, foundation records, the Willow Ridge contract. They're locked into a 2-bedroom cottage, ready when needed. I took the folder, the weight of it familiar. Inside was months of preparation distilled into signatures, legal seals, and financial commitments. Quiet proof that I'd been taking care of my parents long before this meeting. We stepped into the foyer, the air warm with the faint scent of cedar and lemon polish. Light poured through high windows, falling across the black and white tiled floor. And there, on a pedestal near the staircase, stood the crystal vase, tall, delicately cut, the one my mother had sold years ago when money had gotten tight. I remembered finding it in an antique shop 2 towns over, dusty and overpriced for what it was. I'd bought it without hesitation, had it restored, and placed it here where it could catch the light. Keisha noticed my gaze. They'll see it the moment they walk in, she said. That's the point, I replied quietly. I reached out, letting my fingertips trace the cool, perfect edge of the rim. For years, that vase had been just an object, something we'd once had, then lost. Now it was a reminder. Not everything gone has to stay gone. Keisha shifted the folder in my hands. Do you want me to have lunch set in the West Room? Yes, something simple but welcoming, I said. They'll be overwhelmed enough as it is. She nodded and left for the kitchen, her steps soft on the polished floor. Alone for a moment, I looked around the entryway, at the staircase sweeping upward, at the wide hall leading toward the library, at the muted gleam of the wood panelling. This house was more than a statement. It was a decision, a place to plant roots on my own terms. Outside, the last traces of rotor wash stirred the air. Soon, the quiet would break again with their arrival. And when it did, I wanted every detail here to speak before I said a word. When they arrived, the sound of the rotors still clung faintly to the air, as if the machine's presence had left an imprint on the silence. Keisha led them in through the front door, her professional smile a steady anchor against the swirl of expressions: shock, curiosity, unease. Mum's eyes moved instantly to the crystal vase. She stopped, hand tightening on her cane. That was mine, she whispered. Yes, I said. I bought it back a few years ago. Thought it should be here. Grant gave a quick glance around the foyer, jaw set. Sienna looked upward toward the high windows, her lips parted but silent. I guided them into the living room. The winter light poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, catching on the polished wood and the muted silver frames along the mantel. They took their seats, Grant on the edge of an armchair, Sienna next to Ethan on the sofa, Mum and Dad in the matching wingbacks. I stayed standing for a moment, the leather folder in my hands. This, I began, placing the folder on the coffee table, is what I've been working on for the last decade. They watched as I opened it, revealing neat stacks of documents. The trust in Mum and Dad's names, the Blue Fern Foundation charter, the Willow Ridge contract. But I didn't start with the papers, I started with a story. Harbourlock began in a one-room office above a laundromat, I said. I had 2 computers, a second-hand desk, and 3 clients who barely paid on time. In the first 3 years, I almost lost it twice. Once when a competitor undercut our biggest contract. Once when I maxed out every line of credit I could get just to make payroll. Their eyes stayed on me now, no interruptions. Year 4, I filed a patent for a small business data security protocol. We sold it as a subscription service, and it worked. By year 6, we had international clients. By year 8, Aperture Systems approached me with an acquisition offer. I signed the papers 6 months ago. I let that settle for a moment before continuing. The sale made me comfortable, but more than that, it gave me the means to do something I'd been thinking about for a long time, take care of the people who mattered, in a way that actually mattered. Mum's hands came up to cover her mouth, her eyes wet. Dad leaned forward, the cloudiness in his gaze thinning. "You're my Evelyn," he said slowly. "My pride." "Yes, Dad," I said, my voice catching just enough to betray the weight of the moment. "I'm still your Evelyn." Sienna blinked rapidly, as if unsure whether to speak. Grant stared at the open folder, his face unreadable. "I need you to understand," I said, shifting my gaze between them. I gestured to the documents, to the house around us, is not about revenge. It's not a performance. I've already secured a cottage at Willow Ridge for Mum and Dad. The trust covers every expense indefinitely. I didn't do it to prove you wrong. I did it because I love them, and because I could. Grant's eyes flicked to mine, something unspoken passing there, disbelief bending just slightly toward respect. Mum lowered her hands, her voice unsteady. "All these years, we thought you were barely getting by." "I know," I said, "and maybe I should have told you sooner. But I needed to build this without the weight of your doubt on my back. I needed to know it was mine." For a long moment, no one spoke. Outside, the wind rustled the bare branches in the garden. Inside, the air felt different. Less like a battlefield, more like a truce neither side had planned for. Lunch was set in the west-facing dining room, where the windows opened onto a view of the lake. Keisha had arranged the table with understated elegance. Porcelain plates, linen napkins, a centerpiece of winter greenery, and white roses. The meal itself was deceptively simple. Roasted chicken with herbs from the garden, root vegetables glazed in honey, a rustic loaf still warm from the oven. At first, the conversation clung to safe territory. Mum complimented the food, Dad commented on the view. Sienna asked polite questions about the kitchen renovations I'd done. It was as if we were all trying to get our footing on this new ground we'd stumbled into. Me, no longer the assumed outsider, them no longer able to fit me into the old narrative. Then Grant, who had been unusually quiet since we sat down, set his fork down and leaned back. "I've been thinking," he said, eyes fixed on the far end of the table rather than on me, "about what you said earlier, about building something that's yours." I waited, letting the silence stretch. "I hate about 60% of my job," he continued, the words landing with the weight of a confession. "The travel, the politics, the constant performance, but it's what was expected. Ivy League, corporate ladder, the right zip code. I checked every box, and I'm not sure any of it fits me anymore." It was strange hearing him say it. Grant, who had spent our entire adult lives embodying the very model of success our parents admired. "Then why keep doing it?" I asked, gently, his mouth twisted. "Because if I stop, then what? I've spent 20 years building an identity around this. If I walk away, what's left?" Sienna's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "I know exactly what you mean," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "You think I enjoy half the things I post about? The galas, the endless fundraising dinners, the photo shoots for charity features? I can't even remember the last time one of those events felt real." Grant raised an eyebrow. "You're the one who thrives on that scene." Sienna gave a humorless laugh. "Thrived, maybe? Now? Ethan and I have been in counselling for the last year. Most of the time, I can't tell if we're trying to fix things or just negotiating a truce to keep up appearances." Ethan's hand moved under the table, resting lightly over hers. "We've been reassessing," he said simply. I let the words settle between us, surprised at how easily the confessions were surfacing now. Maybe it was the setting, away from their usual strongholds, in a place that was undeniably mine. Or maybe the shock of this morning had cracked something in them, just enough for honesty to slip through. "I used to think you both had it perfect," I admitted. Grant with his boardroom wins, Sienna with her picture-perfect life. I didn't realise the cost of keeping up the image. Sienna met my eyes. "And I used to think you were running from responsibility. Now I'm wondering if you were running towards something the rest of us didn't see." Grant gave a short nod. "Doesn't mean it was easy, though, does it?" "No," I said. "It wasn't easy, but at least I got to choose the difficulty." Keisha slipped in to refill glasses, her presence quiet but grounding. For a moment, the only sound was the clink of silverware and the faint hum of the heating system. "This place," Mum said finally, looking around the room, "it feels solid, like it's not just expensive but built to last." "It is," I said, "because I built it with the intention of keeping it. Same as the foundation, same as Willow Ridge." Her eyes softened. "I can see that now." Dad shifted in his chair, his hand fumbling at the inside pocket of his cardigan. His movements were slow but deliberate, like he'd been waiting for the right moment. From the folds of fabric, he pulled out a small, worn envelope. The paper was soft with age, the corners bent. "I've kept this," he said, his voice clearer than it had been all morning. He slid the envelope across the table toward me. I opened it carefully. Inside was a yellowed clipping from the Cedar Glen Gazette. The headline read, "Local Startup Targets Small Business Cybersecurity." There was a grainy photo of me from more than a decade ago, hair pulled back, eyes bright with the kind of determination that didn't yet know its limits. "I saw this at The coffee shop, Dad said. I clipped it out, put it in my wallet. Every time someone asked about you, I took it out and showed them. His gaze didn't waver. Even if I didn't always say it out loud, I was proud. For a moment, the room seemed to narrow around us, the weight of his words pressing against my ribs. "Thank you, Dad," I said softly. "That means more than you know." Mum, who had been watching in silence, reached for her water glass, then set it down without drinking. "I need to say something," she began, her voice unsteady. "When you left school, your father and I cut you off financially. We told ourselves it was to teach you a lesson, to push you back toward what we thought was a stable path." She looked down at her hands. It was cruel. I see that now, and I regret it. The truth of her admission landed heavily, but there was no bitterness left in me to feed it. "You did what you thought was right at the time," I said. It hurt, yes, but maybe I wouldn't have fought so hard for Harborlock if I'd had a safety net. She blinked, as if caught off guard by my lack of reproach. "I still wish we'd trusted you more." I reached into my sweater pocket and pulled out the gift card Sienna had given me the night before. I set it in the centre of the table, the cheap plastic catching the light. "I've decided how I'm going to use this," I said. Sienna tilted her head, suspicion flickering in her eyes. "Oh." "I'm going to buy winter coats with it," I said, "for some of the residents at Willow Ridge, the ones who like to walk in the gardens but don't have warm enough clothes." For half a second, no one reacted. Then Ethan let out a small chuckle, quickly covered with a hand. Sienna's mouth twitched, fighting a smile. Grant leaned back, shaking his head. "Only you would turn a gift card for interview clothes into a donation." "I think it's perfect," Mum said, her lips curving upward. The tension that had wrapped itself around the table all morning loosened, replaced by something lighter. Sienna let out a short laugh. "Well, at least it'll get used. Consider it repurposed," I replied, a smile tugging at my mouth. It wasn't much, a shared laugh, a moment of ease, but it was the first genuine one we'd had together in years. No posturing, no hidden barbs. Just a room full of people connected by something small but real. For the first time since I'd stepped into this house, I felt the edge of possibility. We drove to Willowridge the next morning, the winter sun casting long, pale streaks across the winding road. The property emerged slowly from behind a grove of bare oaks, a cluster of low, warmly painted buildings connected by covered walkways. The architecture was intentionally modest, designed to feel like a neighbourhood rather than an institution. As soon as we stepped inside the main building, the scent of fresh bread and lavender met us. The reception area looked more like the lobby of a cosy inn than a care facility. Armchairs upholstered in soft fabrics, a fireplace framed by bookshelves, family photos on the mantel. A woman in her 60s, wearing a cardigan dotted with tiny embroidered flowers, approached us with a smile. "Welcome to Willow Ridge," she said. "I'm Clara, the resident care coordinator." I introduced my family, noting the flicker of recognition in Clara's eyes. She knew who I was, but she didn't say it aloud. Instead, she gestured toward a hallway. "Shall we start with the memory care cottages?" We walked down a wide corridor lined with shadow boxes outside each door, each filled with small objects, photos, postcards, even trinkets, that told the story of the person living inside. "It helps residents recognise their own space," Clara explained. "Memory anchors, we call them." The cottage we entered had 10 bedrooms, each personalised to its occupants' tastes. One room had baseball pennants lining the walls. Another displayed a collection of ceramic birds, on a sunny windowsill. Every detail seemed to serve a purpose: soft lighting to reduce agitation, contrasting colours to help with depth perception, even subtle music playing in common areas, tailored to the decade most residents favoured. Mum lingered in a sitting room where 2 residents were playing checkers by a bay window. She touched my arm. It feels like a home, not a place you go to disappear. That's the point, I said. No one here is just a patient. We toured the garden next, a mix of paved paths and raised beds where herbs and flowers grew in warmer months. In one corner stood a painted gazebo, its railings wrapped in fairy lights that would glow softly at night. Clara explained the memory walks, guided strolls through the garden that incorporated scents and textures tied to a resident's past. Sienna, who had been quiet for most of the tour, stopped by one of the raised beds. She brushed her fingertips over the frost-tipped rosemary. "You know," she said, glancing at Clara, "I have a background in fine arts. I've been running design projects for charity events, but something like this, art with a purpose, it feels different." Clara's eyes warmed. "We have an art therapy program. Residents work with volunteers to paint, sculpt, even try photography. It's one of our most popular activities." Sienna straightened, a spark in her expression I hadn't seen in years. "If there's an opening for volunteers, I'd like to join. I can teach techniques, but also help them adapt tools for limited mobility." I raised an eyebrow, pleasantly surprised. "You're serious?" She nodded. "I'm tired of making centerpieces. No one remembers the next day. Here, they might remember how it felt to make something, even if they can't keep the memory forever." Mum smiled, and even Grant's posture softened a fraction. Ethan slipped an arm around Sienna's shoulders, murmuring something I couldn't hear. We finished the tour in the community room, where a few residents were listening to a man playing soft jazz on a saxophone. The sunlight pooled across the floor, and I noticed Dad standing a little taller, tapping his fingers lightly against his thigh in time with the music. "This," I told my family quietly, "is why I wanted Willaridge. Not just the medical care, but the life that continues here." No one argued. For the first time, I felt like we were standing on common ground. After the tour, we gathered in a small conference room overlooking the gardens. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long bars of gold across the table. A pot of tea sat between us, steam curling upward in slow, deliberate spirals. I should probably say something I don't often admit, I began, wrapping my hands around the warm porcelain of my cup. Success isn't as bulletproof as it looks from the outside. It can be isolating. People either want something from you, or they assume they know you because they've read about you. I've learned to be careful, too careful maybe. It keeps me safe, but it also keeps me alone. Sienna's gaze softened, her earlier spark from the art therapy conversation still lingering. Grant leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, but his expression was thoughtful rather than defensive. "It's strange," Grant said finally, "hearing you say that. I always thought you were free, doing what you wanted, answering to no one." "I am, in a way," I said, "but freedom without connection can feel hollow." He looked down at his hands. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about choosing your difficulty. There's a teaching position opening at the business school in the city. I've been asked before, but I never seriously considered it. Now, maybe I should." I tilted my head. You'd be good at it. You have the experience, the presence, and maybe you'd hate less than 60% of your days. A small wry smile tugged at his mouth. Maybe. Ethan, who had been quiet, cleared his throat. I've been rethinking things too. I've spent years advising high net worth clients on growing their portfolios. Lately, I've been more interested in ethical investing, helping non-profits and social enterprises use their funds to create real impact. I'm considering shifting my focus there. Sienna touched his arm, pride evident in her eyes. That sounds like you. I let the conversation breathe. The air in the room lighter now. The defensive postures were gone, replaced by something closer to curiosity, maybe even trust. I have an idea, I said. It's not about careers or money, it's about us. What if we started having dinner together once a week? Just family. No bragging, no measuring each other's worth, no comparing who's doing better. Just dinner. Mum's eyes brightened instantly. I'd love that, Sienna smiled, as long as we rotate who cooks. I'm not letting you two make me the default chef. Grant raised an eyebrow. I can order takeout with the best of them. Ordering doesn't count, I said, laughing. The point is to keep it simple. No catered spreads, no fine china, unless someone feels like it. Just a meal we share. Dad, who had been quietly following the conversation, spoke up. No judgments, he said firmly. We eat, we talk, we laugh, that's all. Yes, I agreed, that's all. It was such a small thing, but the agreement felt like a shift, a commitment to step out of the roles we'd all been playing for so long. In its place, something new could grow. As we left Willow Ridge, walking back through the covered walkway to the parking area, I caught Grant glancing at Sienna with something like amusement. Art teacher, he said. Business professor, she replied. They both laughed, and for once it didn't sound sharp-edged. The cold air outside was brisk, but not biting. For the first time in years, I felt the warmth of possibility radiating from more than just me. The first Sunday came sooner than I expected. Winter sunlight poured into the breakfast room at the estate, glinting off the lake beyond the windows. The table was set simply, no elaborate centerpieces, no place cards, just fresh pastries, bowls of fruit, scrambled eggs and coffee steaming in mismatched mugs. Grant arrived first, shrugging off his coat and actually hanging it neatly on the rack, instead of tossing it over a chair. Smells good, he said, peering at the spread like he was trying to figure out which dish came from a high-end bakery and which didn't. Sienna and Ethan came next, bringing a jar of homemade jam. I made it myself, Sienna said proudly, placing it on the table. Okay, fine. Ethan did most of the work, but I supervised. Mum and Dad followed, Mum leaning on her cane, but looking stronger than she had in months. Dad's eyes were clear this morning, scanning the room with curiosity. Feels like a holiday, he said. We all sat, and the conversation started with the ease of people still finding their rhythm, little updates, small jokes. No one brought up work or money. When Mum reached for the cream and her elbow knocked over her coffee, the dark liquid spreading across the tablecloth and dripping to the carpet below, she gasped, "Oh no, I've ruined it!" "It's just a rug, Mum," I said, reaching for a towel. "Things can be replaced." "This," I gestured to the table, "is what matters." She relaxed, a faint smile touching her lips as she dabbed at the spill. "You've changed," she said softly. After breakfast, we moved outside for a family photo on the stone steps leading to the garden. Keisha handled the camera, framing us against the winter, bare trees and the glint of the lake. We bunched together, Grant with his arm around Mom, Sienna leaning into Ethan, Dad standing a little taller than usual. When Keisha called for us to smile, it wasn't the practiced, polite kind for social media. It was the kind that came from being in the moment. I glanced at the frozen image on the camera screen afterward, surprised at how genuine it looked. This was a picture I'd want to keep. As the others lingered outside, talking about the garden's potential in spring, I stepped aside with Keisha. "I need you to help me with something," I said quietly. "Anything," she replied. "I want to create what I'm calling a soft barrier," I explained. "It's not a wall, more like a framework, boundaries that keep us from falling back into old patterns, clear expectations for visits, topics we leave off the table, ways to handle disagreements before they spiral." Keisha nodded, understanding immediately. "So everyone knows the rules, but it doesn't feel like rules." "Exactly," I said. "It should feel natural, supportive, something that protects what we're building here." "I can draft something," she offered. "We'll frame it as a family charter. Gentle language, but firm enough to matter." "That's perfect," I said. From the steps, Sienna called, "Evelyn, we're talking about planting lavender along the path. You in?" I smiled. "I'm in." As I walked back toward them, I felt the rare certainty that we were, finally, writing a new chapter together. It wasn't flawless, and it never would be. But the first Sunday had proven something important. We could share space without turning it into a contest. We could spill coffee and still laugh. We could stand shoulder to shoulder for a photo and mean it. The Rao Chan mem Keisha would draft would help keep it that way. By late afternoon, the winter light had softened into a pale gold that skimmed across the lake and lit the tops of the bare trees. The air was still, holding that quiet weight that always came before the evening settled in. It felt like the right time to wrap things up, but no one seemed in a hurry to leave. Eventually, I mentioned that Derek had the helicopter ready. This time, there was no gasp of shock, no tightening of postures. Grant simply nodded, gathering his coat. "Convenient way to skip the weekend traffic," he remarked, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. We walked down to the helipad together. The machine stood waiting, its sleek frame catching the last glints of sunlight. The blades began to turn slowly, the air picking up around us. Mum held her cane in one hand, the other tucked into Dad's arm for balance. He was steady today, eyes bright as he looked over the water one more time. As they climbed aboard, Sienna called out over the rising thrum, "Next Sunday, my place, I'll cook. Yes, actually cook." We all laughed, the sound rising into the air and mixing with the rotor's beat. When the doors closed and the helicopter lifted off, it no longer felt like a display. It was simply a way to get my family home before the winter night closed in. I watched them rise over the treetops until they were just a dark shape against the fading sky, then turned back toward the lake. The water was almost still, the faintest ripple moving toward the shore. I walked down to the small dock, my boots thudding softly against the wood. The cold air had a clean bite to it, the kind that woke you up without making you shiver. I sat on the edge of the dock and pulled my laptop from the leather satchel I'd left there earlier. The screen lit my face in the dimming light. There it was, the Tokyo proposal Keisha had forwarded, neatly laid out with market projections, design mock-ups, and risk assessments. I began scrolling, my mind shifting into work mode, running through logistics and timelines. But every so often, my gaze lifted to the lake, to the soft outline of the hills beyond. The stillness here felt like an anchor. It reminded me that my life wasn't just numbers on a contract or strategic moves in a market. It was also this, the sound of geese overhead, the sharp scent of pine, the faint echo of laughter from the helipad still ringing in my ears. For so many years, I'd let my definition of wealth be measured in milestones, closing deals, securing patents, outpacing competitors. And in my family's eyes, I'd assumed wealth could only be proven if I met their criteria. It took losing their faith, building my own version of success in silence, and finally showing them the truth to realize something important. Wealth wasn't about proof. The real wealth was in what happened this weekend, in the coffee spilled without shame, in the photo on the steps, in Sienna talking about lavender and art classes instead of galas, in Grant considering a life that didn't grind him down, in my parents looking at me without the old layer of doubt. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the scent of wood smoke from the house. I closed the laptop, not because the work wasn't important, but because it would still be there tomorrow. Tonight, the balance leaned toward connection. I stayed there until the sun dipped fully below the horizon, painting the lake in shades of silver and shadow. And in that quiet, I understood with a clarity that settled deep in my bones. True wealth is being able to stand as yourself, fully, unapologetically, even among those who once doubted you, and still choosing to love them, not because they've earned it, but because you've decided that love is part of who you are. The cold finally pushed me to my feet. As I walked back toward the house, the lights in the windows glowed warm against the night, pulling me in. I was home.